Alcoholism and addiction is a disease of isolation, and recovery is a process of connecting. And there are a lot of lonely souls in this disease that have a lot of people around them, but they're walking in their own prisons. And they need to know that they're not alone.
Dr. Steve Valle is president of AdCare CJ Services, and for over 30 years has been a recognized leader and international expert in the fields of addiction, criminal justice, and mental health. Dr. Valle was nominated by Senator Harold E. Hughes in 1993 to serve in the Clinton administration as director of SAMHSA, the Federal Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. He's been on the forefront of implementing services for incarcerated men and women, and he was selected to lead the treatment services at the first correctional facility to exclusively house drunk drivers in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Dr. Valle is the founder of Accountability Training, a behavior change model for offenders with addiction. He's the editor of Drunk Driving in America, Strategies and Approaches to Treatment.
I'm Dr. Steve Valle, and I'm president of AdCare Criminal Justice Services, which is part of AdCare Hospital, and that is recently acquired by American Addiction Centers. So it's part of the AAC family nationwide. And I'm head of the Criminal Justice Division, and I've been working in that capacity as president and CEO for about 25 years. And then prior to that, I was in the field, started young. First job was with the Salvation Army as a counselor when I finished graduate school, and worked as chief of psychology when I received my doctorate at an alcoholism treatment hospital north of Boston. And was there several years, and after that period of time, or during that time, I started my own management consulting company called Valle Associates, and was asked by the department, by the representative of the governor's office of Massachusetts at that time, Governor Dukakis, to see if I could help them out, the state, with their drunk driving problems. It was a major issue at that time. Actually, the rate of deaths was over 40,000 at that time for drunk drivers nationwide. And so it was a problem that the country was not doing anything about. And with some strong work from Judge Al Kramer, who headed up the Quincy District Court, and Chief Probation Officer at that time, Andy Klein, we together pioneered a model for developing an intervention and treatment approach for drunk drivers. And it was so successful, they did several outcome studies, that the state then asked me if I could replicate that model for multiple drunk driving offenders who were convicted several times, and as a result of the laws needed to be actually in the correctional facility. So in the Dukakis administration, they knew they had to address this population that was growing in the prisons, and they knew that drunk drivers population were a little different than the regular criminal justice population. They knew that much, and I said, well, that's a good place to start. So I designed a model where we separated out the drunk drivers from the other criminal justice clients or inmates, and we set up a designated treatment unit, and we designed a model that was based on basically time away from the alcohol or drugs in a secure facility, and that would work intensely on changing their lifestyle and their relationship to alcohol. So essentially we pioneered treating the disease of alcoholism in its early days, and we were very strong about calling it a disease, though it was not popular at that time. And Massachusetts then commissioned an outcome study on the model, our prison-based model, and the program was called Longer Treatment Facility, and it received one of the lowest rates of recidivism in the literature at that time. It was under 10%. And I was then approached by the state of Maryland, and we replicated that model in Maryland as well. So I've been very fortunate in my career to be at the front stages of a lot of pioneering efforts, and very grateful for the opportunity that I've been able to have to create these model programs, and then to see how they've evolved over time, so they are really standard good treatment practices today, what we call evidence-based treatment. One of the most significant things, though, as a result of that, was the state of Massachusetts then contacted me, and they said, well, Dr. Humphrey, Dennis Humphrey, was head of programs for the Massachusetts Department of Corrections at the time. He said, well, Steve, your program has done amazingly great work with these drunk drivers, and we see the results. But we all know they're not like real inmates or real prisoners, and with drug and alcohol problems. And what do you think we can do about that? So I designed a model for the state prison system for Massachusetts, and was the first unit-based programs treating alcoholism and other drugs from an addiction disease model, and pioneered those programs, and was very fortunate then, because of the success of those models behind the walls, that other states then began to follow. So I ended up setting up programs around the country, or through technical assistance opportunities, seeing other programs develop and follow that model. So fast forward, and that was on my own when I had my own company, and it was called Right Turn, and Valle Associates / Right Turn. And Right Turn is still going in Maryland, and is a model program for chronic and repeat drunk drivers, as well as other substance use disorder people who get involved in the criminal justice system. I'm very grateful in that I was able to start my career as a young person. Just received my doctorate when I met Harold Hughes. And Senator Harold Hughes was, as many of the audience may or may not know, was really the father of our professional alcoholism treatment programs in this country. The Hughes Act was started in 1970, and I met him, and him and I had a very special connection and relationship, and he would send me all over the country to do interventions on people that were either in high levels of government or in politics and business, because he was one of the first prominent people as governor of Iowa and a senator and a presidential candidate in '72 who came out publicly to say his words, I'm a drunk and I have a disease and I need help. So through that, I was able to do a lot of interesting work, getting people from all walks of society, all vocations, into some type of care and treatment. And one of the things that so impacted my development as a young person in the field was the influence that Harold Hughes had in my life. And we would do retreats based on the spiritual principles of AA and other spiritual ways of growth and development. From that influence, over the course of time, I developed a model that is now operating, or has operated in many states and many programs that I've run. And it's called accountability training, and it has at its core foundation spirituality as so important for the change process to happen. People could get free of alcohol and drugs and not use, but their life was a mess. In AA, we would call it dry drunk, but they just couldn't manage their life very successfully, and they were sober. And I realized in that time what was missing with these folks, and that was a spiritual foundation or some type of spiritual awakening of some kind. How they get that, who knows? That's up to forces greater than myself, certainly. But I noticed there was a unique difference. Fast forward a little bit, and that work with centered use and the importance of a spiritual foundation in one's recovery really made an impact on me. And in mid-1990s, I had a crisis in my own life, and I was just about 6 months prior to that, I'd moved my family from our home in Lynn to Marblehead because one morning we woke up and there's a body on our front sidewalk, and my daughter was 4 years of age at that time, and I just said it's time to move. And we moved to Marblehead and got my family established in a good system, school system, and so forth. And I put my house up for sale. I had a calling that the house needed to be something more than just the real estate. I opened my doors to my house. It was a 5-unit apartment building, and I was working in the prison system at the time, and what impacted me so much was the lack of safe place for inmates coming out of prison, whether they came from our drunk driving programs or drug treatment programs, or they were just released on parole. Inevitably, they would return quickly if they didn't have supportive housing, a safe place to go where there was not using. One of the folks came out of the jail, knocked on my door. He was sleeping in the station wagon in the middle of February, and he said, "I heard that this place is you'll help people try to get back on their feet and have no place to stay." So there was one, and there's two, and there's three. So my house ended up becoming one of the first sober houses in the state. And I said, "Guys, I do this for a living. I'm not going to do this here. This is your house. You run it, and here are the principles. Drug-free. You need to be searching a spiritual path of some kind that allows you to realize that you're not your own God, and you need to find a path that's going to enrich your inner core as a human being." I taught them how to run a therapeutic community, like I did in prisons professionally, but it was their community run. Essentially, that house was my house. I turned over to them. I said, "Guys, you got to go to the meetings. You got to meet regularly. We'll have our weekly community meetings. I'll help you along the way once a week. You got my phone number, and you need to build your own house of healing here." And that's what they did. So 20 years later, that house is still going. It's probably the most impactful development in my career, other than the early days with centered use, because it was through getting to know these, quote, ex-offenders, ex-cons. They want to be called ex-cons. They don't think that that's a bad term. They would say, "Doc, what we need to be able to find a place where we can serve others who had the same problem." And so the Grace House became a place where, without staff, no funding from any government source, where peers started to help peers. And that's probably the third most important thing that I look back at in my career, is the realization of how important the peer model is in recovery. What I do now is work with these guys. They're all over the country, and women who've gone through those early years at Grace House, and many of them are carrying the message. And that keeps me motivated. It keeps me doing what I love to do in this field, and that's working in the recovery with families, those afflicted and affected by this disease.
What's left to do that you think is within your grasp and within our collective grasp?
Well, that's really interesting question. I wrestle with that, especially at this stage of my career, and having gone through so much. I've seen so much changes over the years. I think what's really important is that we are really doing a lot of great stuff out there. And there are a lot of good model programs. We know what works. We know what works in treatment. We know what works in working with treatment for offenders. We don't need to recreate the wheel all over again. I think what we need to do is really find the way that we can enable and empower others to carry that message and replicate what's working out there and not make it so complex and difficult to do. The many paths to recovery, I cut my teeth on the 12-step pathway in recovery and in my experience, and there are certainly that's one of the most vibrant, powerful ways because there is so much support for people when they hit because it's community based and available wherever you go around the world. You can find a meeting if you want to, but there are many other ways to get sober and to turn your life around. And we need to make sure that people have access to that, whether that's medication-assisted treatment or not, in combination with 12-step work and therapy and other forms of treatment, and recognize everyone needs to find their journey. But they need to find it with someone else. It's not something that someone can grasp, at least in my experience, alone. Alcoholism and addiction is a disease of isolation, and recovery is a process of connecting. And there are a lot of lonely souls in this disease that have a lot of people around them, but they're walking in their own prisons. And they need to know that they're not alone.